So to me, that's conflict of interest. If you're trying to regulate.
Hello, I'm Aidan Charron, the Director of End Plastic Initiatives at EarthDay.org, and today I'll be speaking with Susan Thixton. She's the founder of Association for Truth in Pet Food, a pet food consumer stakeholder organization representing the consumer voice at regulatory meetings. She attends pet food regulatory meetings, providing pet owners a voice in the regulatory process. Susan's website, truthaboutpetfood.com, provides pet owners an understanding of regulations, ingredients, recall notices, and recent news in pet food. What made you want to get involved in the industry of regulation around pet food? It's not a super common one for most people, and not something a lot of people really think about.
Learned the hard way about pet food, and this was 30 plus years ago. My dog, back then I was a dog obedience instructor, and I had a dog boarding kennel as well. And the dog that I taught with, who was my best friend, all of a sudden got a lump on her pelvic bone, took her to my vet, and that vet knew more about pet food back then than, unfortunately, most veterinarians know today. He told me that she had bone cancer, that the bone cancer was likely caused from a chemical preservative used to extend the shelf life in the pet food. And I didn't know what really shelf life even was at that point. This was before the internet for me to email them, so I called them. My first phone call to a pet food company. And I asked them how long the food would stay fresh. And they very proudly told me that this pet food would stay fresh for 25 years. that my dog was just 8 years old. So that means that the pet food was going to stay fresh 3 times longer than she lived. I will never forget that day. It just changed my life. That veterinarian loaned me books that he had when the internet came about. I could research papers. Then the regulation aspect of it, there was a regulatory meeting. They're held in different cities across the United States to a year. And it happened to be in St. Petersburg, Florida, which is right next to the town where I live in. And pet owners said, you got to go. And they paid my way to the meeting. And I really liked the aspect of regulations. I'm that person on the highway driving the speed limit. It's me. I'm a rules person. Okay, so the regulation aspect of it intrigued me, but as you peel back more and more of this, you learn that the regulations are there, but they don't enforce them. It's called selective enforcement.
Is there a reason why they're not enforcing those regulations that you've come across?
Well, the biggest thing they don't enforce, I'm going to go roundabout to answer that question. The biggest thing they don't enforce is federal law. U.S. federal law states that no food, and food in law is defined as anything that humans or animals eat, that any food is adulterated, illegal, if it contains any part of a diseased animal or an animal that has died other than by slaughter, okay? Our own meats have to be USDA inspected and passed. You see that seal, on meat products. Pet food, the FDA is who regulates pet food. The FDA directly states that they do not believe that diseased animals or animals that have died other than by slaughter are a risk for animals to consume, and based on that belief, they allow this material into pet food with no disclosure to consumers. Now, to answer your question, why do they do this? Why is there a reason they ignore the law? In this case, I believe it's waste disposal. So the USDA is who inspects meat, and they release quarterly the numbers of condemned carcasses that, the animal was slaughtered, the carcass itself was condemned. It was not allowed into the food chain.
The human food
in
chain.
In 3 months'
correct?
time, in January, February, in the human food chain, in the first 3 months of this year, it was, and I just did a post on this, there was like 30 million pounds, I'd have to check, but it's millions and millions of pounds of condemned animal material. And that's just condemned animal material. Well, that has to be disposed of. That's a lot. It can't be landfilled. If that carcass is diseased for the reason of it being condemned, you can't put that diseased animal into a landfill and possibly contaminate soil, waterways, so forth. So they dispose of it into pet food, and with no disclosure to consumers, none.
And there's no regulation around having to disclose it. I guess there's just no enforcement around having to disclose it to the pet food consumers.
There are regulations, but pet food has even its own language. So when you see on a TV dinner that you're buying for yourself, chicken, it includes chicken. Well, you know what that is. When you see a pet food label, and a lot of pet food labels will say made with real chicken. The chicken in pet food is not the same chicken as in human food. It has a totally separate definition. That is, those definitions are written by an organization called the Association of American Feed Control Officials.
Okay.
They define chicken in pet food or livestock feed. It's a completely different, and there is no requirement in the pet food chicken, even though it's still chicken, there's no requirement in pet food chicken for it to be USDA inspected and passed.
Is there a difference between like wet food and dry food when it comes down to our pets, or they both kind of fall into the same territory of, condemned meat that isn't suitable for human consumption is considered consumable for, I guess, in this case, our dogs and our cats mostly?
Well, pet food is one of two categories. It's not so much dry food or wet food, the style of food. It is the quality of the food. Most pet foods are not food at all. They meet no legal requirement of food. They are feed, like cattle feed, chicken feed, hog feed. Okay, that when it's feed, there are manufacturing standards that are different. The ingredient quality is different. The transportation and warehousing requirements are different because it's not food. Everything with food has all these safety nets built into the regulatory system. With feed, there is not.
Within this industry, What has been the biggest shock to you, like across the board, including the lack of oversight, and then within it? I know you mentioned the preservatives when you first started to get into the field, but has there been anything else that you've come across?
So this rendering facilities, you'll see ingredients on pet food labels that will say chicken meal, beef meal, turkey meal. The meal is an indication that this is a rendered ingredient. Rendering facilities process waste. Okay, so a slaughter facility, those condemned animals, that's a USDA facility. If it's condemned, it is not processed within that plant. Once it's condemned, it's got to go. USDA is on site during all hours of operation. That's got to go. So it's got to go somewhere. They will take that carcass and haul it to a rendering facility. Sometimes there are rendering facilities attached to or adjacent to slaughter facilities. Sometimes there's not. And I've done Google Earth images, gotten the address of these rendering facilities, and gotten Google Earth images of these rendering facilities. And you look at these pictures, and there are trailers full of carcass parts sitting out in the sun. They dump them on the ground and bulldoze them into a pit, grind them up, cook them, and sell them to pet food. And I'm not kidding. I've got those pictures on my website.
Oh my God.
They're on there. There was a young woman in Denver, Colorado, that was going to a warehouse party, her and a couple girlfriends, and it was late, 11 o'clock one night, and her Google Maps or whatever sent her in the wrong direction. And they look over, and these pictures are on my website too. They look over and they see a mound of hog carcasses, just a mound of these dead animals just piled up. And it scared the daylights out of them. And I knew, and she freaked out. She told her professor at school, and her professor said, the professor didn't know what it was. You need to delete those pictures and never say anything to anybody. Well, that was a rendering facility. And they, to take that material, when you see these pictures of this nasty decomposing carcasses, and that becomes food, it is beyond my comprehension. The worst, though, it gets worse. In 2017-18, Hurricane Florence went through North and South Carolina.
I was living in Wilmington, North Carolina at the time. I was living in Wilmington, North Carolina at the time. So we were right there. We were out of school for about 6 weeks because of that hurricane.
And there was massive flooding.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of confinement farms raising animals in confined circumstances in that area. These animals, I think it was more than 3 million poultry, turkey and chickens, and 300,000 hogs drowned in their barns. Well, when the waters subsided, all the water went down. Here's all these dead carcasses, decomposing carcasses, bulldozers. The state of North Carolina and the state of South Carolina allowed bulldozers to come in. They hauled all of those decomposing carcasses along with, all this waste in the water, the old bedding, everything. And it was ground up and sold to pet food with no disclosure to consumers.
My wife and I have tried to make improvements in our two dogs' lives, just trying to cook their chicken, boiled chicken that we're buying at the same time, and just trying to supplement their appetite that way. But what changes have you made?
I've made a lot of changes. I don't give my pets anything that is feed grade, nothing. And I
Okay.
find out everything. We do cook some for the animals. I have 5 cats and 2 dogs. I have a herd. So we do cook pet food. I offer them some homemade, some commercial raw, some commercial cooked. Never, ever, ever a rendered ingredient. I won't, when you go to the bank with the dog in the car, or, you're out somewhere and somebody wants to give your dog a treat. I don't even let anybody give them a treat unless I know what it is. I'm that picky. Cooking for your pet is scary right at first. Because you think, oh my gosh, I'm going to kill them. Is this have in there what it's supposed to have? But it's really not as difficult as long as you follow a good recipe.
Got it.
There's a brand new book, if I can give them kudos, from a friend of mine, Dr. Karen Becker and Rodney Habib, called The Forever Dog Life. And this book has recipes in it. It has all these tips to how to have cleaners. There's so many things in our homes that can contaminate our animals, and they're little, or even if they're big, their life is not as long as ours, and it culminates in them. And if you do just little steps at a time. For human, if you make the pet food yourself, it's really not as expensive, not nearly as expensive as purchasing human grade pet food. You can purchase human grade pet food to make sure it's made all the same way. If you can go organic, that's even better. Humanely raised animals, that the pet food was sourced from humanely raised animals. All those are little things that, as much as you can do of those type of things, the better your pet's going to be for it.
When it comes to plastic toys and things, do you still use plastic toys for your pets? Are you trying to move away from those? The only reason I asked is our heavy focus on plastic and health. We've seen, health studies come out about rats, and health studies start to come out about humans. And we're starting to look into, what's going on with our pets. I worked at an animal clinic throughout high school, and so I was constantly having to pull the, nylon ropes out of pets or the plastic buildup from little particles. But is that something that you try to avoid now?
Oh, absolutely. Every little bit you can do, paying attention to all of those things is significant. It's not something that I know as much about, like pet food, but absolutely, my pets get in some of the toys I even have made myself, sew it myself. They have cloth toys, but even that, it would be good if you can get organic fabric, and real quick, sew a little toy, there they go, and at least what they've got is healthy. For chews, my dogs and even the cats, we give the cats chicken wings to chew on, and they'll clean that, and the gnawing on that helps to clean their teeth. My dogs get bones purchased right from the grocery store. That's their chews, and you can keep the bones, and they'll chew on them for a long time afterwards as well.
Well, awesome. Is there any other advice you want to give to the people watching?
Just keep learning, keep uncovering. It's hard to accept the information that I share with pet owners. Sometimes, it's so shocking.
Right.
They have a hard time believing it. That couldn't be true. And it turns out it is. And it's hard to accept. I had a pet owner one time argue with me via email because I did a post, and she said, no, that can't be true. That can't be true. And Yeah, it is. There's a link to the evidence. Read it. She'd email me again. No, it just can't be. And we went back and forth. And finally I said, okay, I'm not going to argue with you. If you don't want to believe it, that's fine. And about a month later, she emailed me and said, it was like getting to the middle of an onion. You wanted me to get right to the middle of the onion right away so that I understood. Right. And I couldn't do that. I could only peel off one layer at a time, sit back and absorb that, and then I could remove another layer and another layer. So for pet owners, keep learning and just keep peeling back the onion. Keep learning as much as you can.
Well, thank you so much. We really appreciate it. Please check out truthaboutpetfood.com and then check out our upcoming Pets versus Plastics report, which should be coming out any day now. So we really appreciate you coming on. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.